Let's go ahead and set that switch. Who.node. And which node are we going to set? We're going to set the switch we've created, which is the switch cluster type. And we can see it's already being suggested, so we know that we've got the correct node. .parm, and which parm? The input parm. And we're going to say .set, and we're going to set it with what value? The block type number, or block type num in this case. So when this code runs, what it does is we pull in a city block like this, and the first thing that runs after importing the block is the Python code. It sets the block type to undefined and the block type number to -1. Then it runs over the packed block, which gives it 1 point, and it retrieves the block type attribute, which is the one that we have here, block type, and that's commercial. So then it retrieves that, and it says if block type is equal to houses, your number is 0. But if your block type is equal to commercial, your block type num is now 1. And then we're saying whether it's 0 or 1, set the switch node accordingly. So once we've written this code, and we're looking at our chain here, now if we would switch this back to 0, we get a house block. And you'd expect this code to run once you select anything underneath here, which then should trigger that switch node. However, it will only switch once we change the input here. So if we go back up and we go into our city blocks node and set this one to 0, which is also a commercial cluster, we go back up and into city block sim. If we now look, we see that it's automatically switched it back for us to the commercial clusters instead of the house clusters, which we left it with. So this code is working. Let's expand this window again. And underneath here, we continue writing. Let's make another hashtag line, another comment, generate random number between 0 and 2, and set building cluster switch. And this will also be where the random function comes in. So underneath this line, let's make another one, random num is, and in between brackets, we can say random.rand int. And what that does is it makes a random integer number, and then we have to set between which values we want that number to be. So between 0 and 2. And this function, random.randint, random is the module we've piped in from the top. So in the top, we're getting the random module. And here we're calling the module. And from that module, we're calling the randint function, which we're having retrieve a value between 0 and 2. So it could be 0, 1, or 2. And then we're going to use that to set the nodes that we've created before. And that will be these nodes. If we go up inside building clusters, we have this one, the switch house cluster, and the switch commercial cluster, and they are the ones that we're setting with the code. Let's go back to the city block sim and write the code that sets those. Expand this window and come underneath here. Who.node, which node are we going to set? We're going to set a node from object level, where we're going to make a relative path. So we have to go up 2 levels, building clusters. And there it is, already being suggested. And we're going to be setting the houses cluster switch. So switch houses cluster. Which parm are we going to set? Again, the input parm. And we're going to set it with what value? With the value that we just created, random num. That's what it ends with. Let's get the whole line, Control-C, and come underneath and paste that. And we're also going to set the switch commercial cluster in the same way. So when I try to do that for the commercial cluster, I get an error message. Let's just check which one we need. So inside building clusters, let's see what we've called it. And I've mistyped commercial with 1 N. So let's change that to double. Come back up, back into city block sim. And sure enough, the error is now gone. So now what's going to happen every time that Python node runs, it's going to set the nodes according to the values that we've just defined. And aside from the Python code here at the top, let's create one at the bottom. So let's go to the bottom of the chain, and just above the out city block point cloud null, we're going to add another Python node. Let's call it Python_write file. And that's because we're going to be storing all these blocks in a file so that later on we can pull them in all together at the same time. We'll have to make a small change to the node again though. Let's go to the parameter interface and find a separator and a file. So a separator, and we should have a file there, and we want these above. Let's call the file file, very original, and we label it file as well. And that should do. Hit apply and accept. And now we'll be able to select a file from the top node here. This Python node, which writes to the file, is also going to be used to drive some of the automation. So before we set up this node and write the code, let's go to out and set up the network we're going to be using. Let's put down a geometry, which is basically just a ROP for geo, and let's set that up. Let's set the frame range from 600 to 600. Delete the channels, and the subpath is going to be that final null in our CityBlock sim, because that's what we're going to be writing out right there. And then we're going to have out the CityBlock point cloud. So whatever comes out of that as a result is going to be stored, and we're going to be storing the path that is storing at into that file. And later we're going to be using that file to import all of the paths at the same time and lay down a network for us that's going to do this automatically. So there is a dot network inside our chain, and for that to work successfully, we're going to have to tick initialize simulation ops. So make sure that's ticked. Let's also change the output file name. So we're going to keep everything up to $hipname, and then we're going to change it into .block underscore $wedgenum, and you'll see in a moment why. Then .bgo.sc. So now we're going to append a wedge ROP and then call in this variable from there. Let's pick that up in the next clip.